is with us as well. And this is exactly the point, isn't it, Zain? The Fars news agency is saying, dismissing President Trump's announcement of the reopening of the Strait as part of a largely negotiated deal as being incomplete, and I quote here, incomplete and inconsistent with reality. Zain.
And this is what we've seen routinely. Anytime the U.S. president says something, Iranian agencies like Fars tend to discredit it. And it really does illustrate that perhaps we are not all the way there. But as long as things continue to move in the right direction, certainly for regional players, that will be what they will be watching. It does illustrate that on the ground in Iran, there are competing voices to try to, for how things should be negotiated with the United States. There's a great deal of competing voices within this fractured leadership in Iran that has seen its top leaders killed since the beginning of this war. They have been heavily targeted. The United States will see that as a victory, but Iran still standing, Iranians will see that as a victory. And for the GCC countries stuck in the middle of this ongoing back and forth, there really is an uncomfortable reality to face of how to move forward in terms of balancing the relationship with the U.S. on one side and Iran on the other. Iran is a neighboring country. You can't change geography. The GCC countries know that they will have to continue to deal with Iran, to have some kind of diplomatic relationship. The United States and its bases and its alliances with the U.S., the GCC countries aren't seeing this as necessarily a complete positive anymore. It has exposed these assets, these military assets that are across the GCC countries as vulnerabilities, as well as we've seen Iran carry out attacks on U.S. assets in the GCC. So going forward, what GCC countries are likely to look at is to try to change how they deal with the U.S., with Iran, to deal with what have been realistically vulnerabilities that have been exposed throughout the course of this war. We've seen infrastructure come under attack, not just oil and gas, but water and electricity. We've seen multiple cities and populated residential areas deal with things like debris fall. We've seen the impact that drone warfare has had on its air defense systems. We've seen how cheaper drones have affected expensive jets and air defense systems that the GCC countries have been using throughout the course of this war to defend the skies over their countries. So what we are likely to see going forward is for the GCC countries to continue to push for stability, not returning to conflict, and to try to reduce their own military and economic vulnerability, things that have been exposed since this war began nearly 3 months ago.
Zain Basravi here in Doha. Let's get over to Miami now. Kenneth Katzman is a Middle East policy analyst and a senior fellow at the Sofan Center, and he joins us from Florida, of course. Kenneth, thank you for joining us. Well, first of all, let's have a look at how this MOU, we don't have all the details, of course, just yet, but how do you think it's going to be received by Benjamin Netanyahu and his government?
Well, thank you for having me again. You know, as I've been telling contacts the last and associates past few hours, there's certain non-negotiable things Mr. Trump has to get out of this to be able to go to the Congress, the American people, Netanyahu, to say that this was a success. And at the very least, he needs to have Iran's agreement for a long-term suspension of uranium enrichment, and probably even more importantly, he must get that highly enriched uranium out of Iran. He also must get the Strait of Hormuz fully open, no taxes, no tolls, no fees. Those are the three things he absolutely must get out of this agreement, whether it's today or after a further negotiation. That's okay. It doesn't have to all come today, but at the end, he can't say that this is over until he gets those three things. If he does not get those three things, it's going to be viewed as a complete humiliation. And I think in the Republican ranks and the historical ranks, he's going to be viewed as a tremendous failure, unfortunately.
Kenneth, right, well, that's one thing, but I think one of the other things which have been stipulated here is that he has to also adhere to a proper ceasefire in southern Lebanon. Will he?
Well, that's not something, you know, he can really control. I don't know that that's in the agreement. I haven't seen that really mentioned by the Iranians recently. That's not something he can really guarantee. I mean, Israel is a sovereign country. Netanyahu and the Israeli people consider Hezbollah an existential threat. They want it to disarm, dismantle, dismobilize the militia wing, at least. And even if Mr. Trump says that, he has no ability to dictate to Netanyahu that Netanyahu stop fighting in Lebanon. So I think the Iranians realize that is not something they're going to get, even if they insist on it in the negotiations.
Kenneth Katzman there from the Sofan Center in Miami, and Middle East policy analyst. Let's get back to Abdullah Bandar al-Ataibi. He's assistant professor in international affairs at Qatar University. Abdullah, thank you for sticking around. Well, you know, we've got to gain some dissonance here, haven't we? We've got Donald Trump saying the Strait of Hormuz is open, but the Iranians, with the Fars news agency there, saying the reopening of the strait as part of a largely negotiated deal is incomplete and inconsistent with reality. Again, we're going to have all these sticking points, aren't we?
I mean, yeah, this is basically, Rashad, what we talked about just earlier, the division with Iran. I mean, if this memorandum of understanding and this potential deal not to move forward and to be a reality, I think we have to keep an eye on two things, two main factors. IRGC and also Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister. These two, they are not actually a fan of what's happening now with President Trump and Iran having a memorandum of understanding where mediators managed to kind of bring back, together the views of these two parties, at least for now, with signing this understanding and having a ceasefire for a time and allowing more chances and more time for diplomacy to prevail and to kind of try to bridge the gap between both parties. But this is a quite problem, and this is quite problematic, and how the Iranian negotiators basically could control the IRGC and control their behavior, because we don't know what's going to happen within these within the time. Because what we have seen so far is President Trump's announcement only. It's his post, but he says there are parts of this deal need to be finalized, or this part of the understanding needs to be finalized. So from now till things being finalized, we don't know what's going to happen, if there are factors that will be involved in ruining the whole thing. And also one thing is the Strait of Hormuz. The question here of the Strait of Hormuz, I think the best possible exit strategy for both parties is to announce the opening of Strait of Hormuz with no details. This would allow both parties to go back to their audience with the narratives of, yeah, they did their best, and because the Iranians could say, well, we forced the Americans to lift their blockade, and the Americans would be like, our blockade paid well and actually paid off very well and opened the Strait of Hormuz. But the question will remain. The problem is the battle of statements. One statement of President Trump and one statement from Iran, and particularly from IRGC. And this is ruining the whole thing, because we used to, 11 years ago with the first deal, the whole negotiations happened behind the closed doors. We had no idea about details, and this is where the egos prevail and show up. Now, with the statements, the battle of statements between the US and Iran, we see the egos are coming back, and the egos actually are taking a bigger role, because both parties think they are victorious. So they are the ones need to enforce a deal and not to concede a deal.
Abdullah, thank you. Abdullah Bandar al-Ataibi there from Qatar University joining us. Well, Ali Hashim is still with us. He's in the studio. And Ali, I mean, this is a developing story. How's it developing?
Well, there's a possibility that if both sides approve the draft, given the fact that Pakistan played a crucial role in reaching this understanding. Now, regardless of this moment, they're not talking about ending the war, rather than putting it on a continuous ceasefire. But
the worst thing would be a frozen conflict, wouldn't it?
It will be a frozen conflict, but on the path towards a solution, because there is a framework. This framework will take both sides towards a table to talk the stalling points, the hanging points, mainly the nuclear issue and how to end this issue. But that wouldn't be in a situation of war. The war will be almost in a let me say, hanging situation, the strait will open, Iran will get part of its frozen assets, the United States will lift the blockade, and at least we'll be in a more diplomatic situation. Now, what we're hearing is that there is a possibility that there'll be a ceremony in Islamabad, and that President Trump, the Pakistanis hope that President Trump will attend it.
Now, Ali, tell me something here. I mean, what about guarantees here? I mean, because every time we've seen the Americans negotiate with the Iranians, they've ended up bombing them in the middle of those negotiations. So, you know, there's got to be somebody providing some guarantees. Is there anybody?
Well, for now, it doesn't seem that this is being mentioned in the proposal, because the Iranians wanted guarantees and they wanted a permanent end of the war. What we are understanding is that President Trump preserves the right to attack Iran in case they are not going to abide by their commitments. So still it's fragile, still it's hanging. And as I just told you, it's a very big if this is going to be approved by both sides. Now, it could be, but at the end, it gives both sides the chance to come down the ladder in a face-saving situation, you know, kind of easy for both to claim that they got their own objectives achieved. The Americans opening the strait, the Iranians getting back their money. Actually, the Iranians were under attack. They were in the war. But the issue is that after this war, what's going to happen? This is the big question for the region.
That is the big question. Let's find out more as we get over back to Tehran and get to Rasul Sultan, who joins us from there. It's late at night, but are we hearing anything fresh coming out of the Iranian administration?
Well, indeed, so here, only the spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry, and also he is now officially the spokesperson of the Iranian negotiating team, Ismail Bakai, saying that this is a victory for Iran, without further providing the details. However, now here in Iran, the main discussion is about the status quo in the Strait of Hormuz, so the status of the Strait of Hormuz. And so just as we have seen around an hour ago, President Trump simply saying that the status of this critical choke point is going to return back to the pre-war situation. And Iranian Fast News Agency, which is very much close to the IRGC, Revolutionary Guards here, is saying that that doesn't reflect what both parties have agreed on, and saying that Iran is going to keep its control over the Strait of Hormuz, at least for the period of the ceasefire, during all the negotiations. Until the negotiations are concluded, Iran is going to be the sole power, the only actor that is going to simply issue the permissions for the ships and giving the clearance, checking what they are carrying, the materials that are on board, and the origin of the country, and the destination of the ship, the origin of the ships, and the destinations of the ship, the final destination of the cargoes, and also the number of ships as well is going to be controlled by Iran. So what we see here is that the Strait of Hormuz is Iran's biggest leverage, and has been Iran's biggest leverage throughout all these diplomatic engagements. And indeed, many people in Tehran describe it as the economic nuclear bomb. It's the ultimate deterrence for Iranians. And Iranians are saying, well, we will not give up on that so easily. And so throughout all the negotiations, Iran wants to negotiate in the strength of position. And to do that, somehow it needs to keep its sovereignty over that. And of course, this is something that the regional countries have their objections, and the United States, based on what President Trump has just posted, is not acceptable to them as well. But as I said, this is from a semi-official news agency, Fars news agency, which is close to the Revolutionary Guards. That doesn't mean that it is reflecting 100% official position of Iran. However, still worth seeing that. All right, this is perhaps in the coming hours is going to be the main sticking point here. However, these debates, even in the first hours of that the deal is now very much close, that we are seeing the debates are ongoing on the major issue, shows how the situation is delicate here. But what we know is that the sources are confirming us that the deal is almost done. So we know that the parties have agreed on a draft largely.
Rasul, thank you. Rasul, stick around, though. Rasul Sardar there in Tehran. Now, let's get back to Richard Weitz, who is a senior fellow at the NATO Defence College, and he's joining us from Prague. If we assume that hostilities have come to an end, let's ask the big question. What did this conflict actually achieve?
Well, I wouldn't. I noticed that some people were saying, well, this is going back to the Obama JCPOA of 2015. But there are some differences. Notably, any deadlines would be an extension on that deal. So many of the terms would have expired by now. And so the Iranian program would be totally unconstrained. So if we were even to negotiate a similar deal to the Obama period, then you would add another decade to the deadlines and delay any Iranian potential to have nuclear weapons. So that in my view, would be a positive. Beyond that, it just, you get into the realm of counterfactuals. If the U.S. and Israel hadn't attacked now, and then they try to have some escalation with Iran again later, would they be even worse off at the pace of the Iranian military developments? We've seen Iran develop, as people in the Gulf know, a range of projectiles, missiles, drones, and the numbers are just going to increase by thousands. Before the war, most projections were increased by thousands. I'm not sure, what production effects we're going to see. There are reports Iran is beginning to rebuild its facilities, add new drones, so that may be pushed back by just a year or two, but it just depends on the battle damage assessment.
Richard